Hello, Generals. We are back with Ultimate General Civil War in the Major General Union campaign. We are preparing for the Battle of Antietam, having finished the campaign of short battles leading up to it. As a brief run through of the armies, or army going into the battle, we have 1, 2, and 3 Corps. I Corps under George McClellan with a speed buff and the infantry perk. The infantry units are all hanging around the 1,400 man mark. Cannons are between 8 and 12 guns. 8 is just because I'm out of howitzers to fill the unit up, but otherwise the established size should be in the vicinity of 10 for medium and long range guns. Close range guns like a Napoleon or a 12-pound howitzer, if I'm still using them, will be in the 12 gun range, so I have some buffer room to lose guns without losing efficacy. When I get more howitzers, I'll fill them up. Snipers hang out in the 350 man mark room, and that goes for Sharps guns, JF Browns, and Burnsides as well. So, as you can see, 1 star for every unit in I Corps. Some of the Cav and a handful of the artillery have picked up their 2nd stars. 2 Corps is basically exactly the same. A slightly different orientation for the Cav division, but for the most part, infantry in the 1,400 man mark area, 1 star more or less across the board with some exceptions, and 100% rifles across the entirety of the army. 1855s, Harper's Ferries, so forth and so on. Again, artillery is in the 10 gun range, and where things get a little messier is 3 Corps, and this is predominantly an issue of access to guns. Good guns, that is, rather than really being an issue of access to men or money, as we've got plenty of those. And then we have a slightly outsized component of artillery relative to infantry in 3 Corps, and that's just an issue of 3 Corps is some new units, and I don't expect 3 Corps to be doing a whole lot of fighting going into the battle. The general plan is for 2 Corps to handle the brunt of the early fighting, 2 Corps having a ammo perk for the general. I Corps will back up or provide support, and 3 Corps will be supporting on the right. I don't expect 3 Corps to do much in terms of crossing the river, and that's why they have the development in artillery relative to infantry. Take a look at numbers. 4 Corps, 10 divisions to our 3 Corps and 12 divisions. That means that there are relative parity there. 62 brigades to our 64, relative parity there. 55,000 soldiers to their 56,000, relative parity there. 130 guns to their 150 and change. Slight numeric superiority on the Confederate side. I'm not terribly concerned about it. And in fact, that gun disparity will likely account for the extra soldiers somewhat on the Confederate side. So, all things considered, we're functionally looking at a 1-to-1 ratio in this particular campaign or battle. And I don't know if this is an effect of the Antietam battle and the scaling that goes into it, or if this is an effect of our continuous, really never-ending effort to hungrily, aggressively chase down every single Confederate soldier we can and really keep their numbers under control. So I don't know if that's, if I expect that a degree of that is obviously at play here, but I don't know for certain. So like any long battle, I'll be muting the mic during the playthrough, and I'll be recording a post commentary track. But before I do, I'll walk through some of the setup. The Confederates have chosen to face our army into the town of Sharpsburg. We're going to take a look at some of the crossing, the nearest round. Actually, let's just skip all this and go straight to the fight. First wave attacks from the south. So, how much of the map can I see here? All right, so not a whole lot. I'll be pushing my initial allotment of troops over into this region with an eye towards kind of conquering or controlling here, moving into this region, and then using this and this sort of ridge line here as a way to push into the woods. By the time that all of that has happened, there's going to be some cavalry that'll be moving on here. I want to try and inflict some casualties, but I'm not entirely sure if I'll be able to push them completely off. Then by the time that all happens, the remainder of 2 Corps will have shown up, and they're going to be pushed artillery kind of on this line, maybe some skirmishers just to make sure that we don't get flanked. Most of the infantry is going to be pushing to the extreme right of this map, which will be the Union left, and using these houses and the forests to try and move up to this position. I'm fairly certain that there's going to be Confederate troops here. I'm nearly positive they're going to be on the fence line. I'm not entirely sure if there's going to be Confederate troops here, and I don't remember. I'm fairly certain there's a large contingent of artillery at this portion of the battlefield. So this has a risk in my mind of getting messy. Ultimately, what's going to happen with regard to the Dunker Church portion of the battle is my intent is to move pretty slow. I don't need to capture this flag right now. I don't need to capture this flag right now. So really, it's a consideration of force protection and degrading the Confederates where I can. So I'm going to be trying to use trees. I'd like to just occupy this position right here, and then as much of this position as I can without suffering a great deal of losses. But without further ado, we are going to jump into things, and I'll see you again in a few seconds. Fiasco out. Okay, so with Antietam, you have one of the best opportunities to conduct a grand battle almost entirely by yourself, but also you end up getting access to this whole map, and you can fight this battle basically however you want. And that's one of the really kind of cool things about Antietam. Fredericksburg, I think, is a bit of the same, as is, in my mind, Chancellorsville. And then as we get later into the war, it's been long enough since I've played in any of those battles that I forget kind of whether or not they really give you a full battlefield or not. Or not Chancellorsville, Chickamauga. Chickamauga is kind of a bitch, but it's a good fight. So the initial plan with Antietam is that you get your first corps, which in this case is Second Corps, who has the ammo perk as the commanding general and the avatar. You get them in waves. So this is our second wave coming in now. The first wave moves in one block, and I try and keep them all together. And they're at the moment just going to be engaging cavalry, and their general plan is to spread out and make sure that the cav kind of can't come at me obliquely. I want to make sure that I can kind of control a portion of the map of their angular approach, and they pretty rapidly oblige me with regard to the strategy. One unit just runs back to the main Confederate position in the center, and then one unit, I think, kind of tries an abortive attempt at sort of fighting me, and then just sort of decides to say screw it. And then they sort of do this thing where they kind of run in and take a lot of pot shots at me until I get a screen of skirmishers up front to just kind of make it an unprofitable action for them. I continue to extend my line to this group's right. It's also the Union right, actually, but this small task force, I continue trying to extend the line. My intent is to occupy that small forest north of the farm, and then I'm also taking this other wing of 2 Corps and moving them up to the edge of cover so that once they're in the cover, I can kind of figure out what I want to do with them. But a lot of the strategy on this map is going to evolve for me when I come in contact with Confederate forces. I have a general idea of where I expect them to be, which I outlined in the sort of the preamble. I expect them to be on the fence lines. I expect them to be in that copse of trees to the far right of the fields. And I expect a limited force to be in this forest here near Dunker Church with a larger bit of artillery in and around Dunker Church. That is a pretty common Confederate disposition for the Battle of Antietam that, you could expect to run into. So, having set up my position, I'm looking at what I want to do on the screen's left. Let's just talk about this from the position of the screen. The screen's left. I'm thinking about what I want to do, and I'm thinking about what I want to do on the right. And so, broadly speaking, my objective is to take these two different task forces and kind of strike towards the middle and smash the Confederate Army between the two of them. And so that when or if a group falls back from one task force, they run into the guns of the other, and then they don't get a chance to just kind of like chill out and breathe. This is intended to be kind of a victory by maneuver. It, to a degree, works out once I have enough other forces to sort of force these things into position. But right now, because I have rough numeric parity, and frankly, the Confederates have better defensive positioning than I do, and they're also more centralized, they have the advantage of interior lines. I don't have the ability to make good on some of those, offensive goals. There's also a much heavier position on the Confederate, on the screen's right, Confederate left, where the two units that are starting to advance now on the right of the screen are trying to maneuver. I wasn't expecting to run into 3 formed brigades, and there are that many. And then there's 3 or 4 of them in the fence line here, and so I need to blast one off with artillery, and I start getting the secondary group online in the north, and I realize they need to be in position yesterday, basically. So we're still getting everything kind of posted, moving up. They come screaming at me, as the AI is wont to do. In this particular instance, it's 1 brigade coming at me, and I've got 2 brigades basically in double file with a unit of skirmishers off to the flank providing flank fire, which isn't really intended to kill anybody. I mean, whatever casualties they get, obviously I'm not going to say no to, but it's intended to sap the morale of the attacking brigade. Another one follows it up, and this is going to be kind of the trend on the screen right, Union left, really until I get more troops down there to support it, where essentially someone comes in, I throw them back, someone comes in right behind it, and then I throw them back, and then rinse, wash, repeat. And that sounds like, it's a good thing you're throwing the Confederates back. Here's the thing. I have to give ground every time that happens, and I take losses every time that happens. And yes, they do too. Okay, fine. But if I have to give ground and take losses, and my units get tired, and my units take morale shock and all that kind of stuff, eventually, as the Confederates come screaming at me, I'm going to lose that fight. So this is the map finally extends, and we take a look at the sunken road, which is it's this unassailable position, which you would not think that it's unassailable because it's out in the open. But because of the way the slope of the terrain works out, the Confederates have a great position, and the Union is very hard-pressed to attack it, especially because they want you to cross the river down here just right into the waiting guns of Confederate infantry and just sort of sacrifice all those troops for basically no reason. So we take a look at what I want to do. I've got my block of troops way down on the right. I have them cross north of where they spawn. I have this force of 4 Confederate brigades on the right here, engaging my 2 with a wing skirmisher unit, artillery, and another division or brigade. And then we get our Cav division coming in, and I'm not really sure where I want to do anything with them yet because I haven't found a Confederate position that isn't deeply entrenched at this point, and the Cav is pretty useless for really anything else. And I will admit now that I kind of struggle to figure out what to do with the Cav in this particular battle. So I find them to be very, very useful in battles with a large open field component, and then I think now I'm struggling to figure out what to do with them if there's ever really any serious cover. However, the main component of Second Corps has forced the Confederates off of the wheat field position and is slowly pushing them out of this copse of trees to the right of the fences. Now they're still kind of doing their thing there. I've got snipers working on the artillery. Snipers do great in this battle. This is really the battle where my snipers and skirmishers really earn their paycheck and then some. And then we're doing the same thing on the Union right screen left, where General Fiasco's kind of watching his dudes. The Confederates come screaming at me. I send one unit back. The Confederates come screaming at me with a reinforcement. I send them screaming back. In all of these processes, I take losses. Losses I frankly can't afford. And they just retreat, rest up, and come at me again. And they have a general, and they have artillery support, and they have Dunker Church, and they have all this stuff. And I'm not effectively kicking them out of that terrain. I'm managing their presence, and I'm committed now to the point that I feel like I have a hard time understanding what exactly I would even do to sort of redeploy my line. But at the moment, I'm not sure. So here I am checking stuff out, kind of from the topographical perspective, trying to figure out where's a good angle of approach on Sunken Road. And the answer is that there isn't one. You deploy in such a way that the Confederates feel inclined to come to you, and you whittle them down, degrade the force, basically over the fighting day. So in this case, the three hours for this phase of the mission, but you get the whole day. So you just degrade them over the course of the fighting day and trust in your superior positioning. This is not a battle that you win on maneuver or like grand sweeping gestures and maneuvers where you're like, haha, I've defeated 3rd Brigade, and like their 12th Division has folded. I am a victorious general. It's not that kind of battle. This is the kind of battle where, really this is the kind of war, honestly, but this is the kind of battle where you win, quote unquote, by degrading their ability to initiate offensive operations to the point that the force falls apart. And that does just mean out-killing them. In a battle like this where you've got rough numeric parity, there's really no excuse to take a shitload of casualties. Some degree of fighting obviously will occur. Some degree of casualties is clearly inevitable. Let's say that both the forces are in the vicinity of about 45,000, which is the truth today. If you were to take 10,000 casualties in that fight and then destroy the Confederate army in the process, like, you would call that a good day. But if you were to take, say, 20,000 casualties and then defeat the Confederate army in that process, you would still call that a good day. But at that point in time, like, how expensive is it for you to repair the Union army, and how much experience have you bled out on the field in this day? So, I have the Cav kind of charging down this brigade. I realize, like, oh shit, there's the Confederate army dug in near Sunken Road, and I get lucky this time that I'm able to pull them out before any serious harm befalls them. The main body of 2 Corps is in position, blasting the Confederates out of the central fields there and blasting the Confederates off of Dunker. The other reinforcements from I Corps are moving up to support the offensive, and they're ultimately going to be the anvil upon which the Confederate army breaks. But it takes a bit of time to get there, and there's somewhat of a messy process in the middle there. We still are struggling to kick them off of Dunker. I don't think that, like, if I had to go back and do this over again, I'm not entirely sure I'd be as aggressive or insistent in taking Dunker as I end up being here. Because I'm not entirely sure Dunker Church is actually a requirement a victory requirement, or it may be, but it may be one of those things where I just let myself degrade the Confederate Army naturally, and then eventually through sheer force of attrition and simply their inability to resist my movements, I preserve the force a little stronger and then take Dunker later. Maybe that could be a thing too, but we live and learn. So what's happening is I advance the portions of 3 Corps that are present. I have a screen of skirmishers selected, and then their parent brigades also selected, so that what happens is the skirmisher is deployed immediately in front of the parent brigade that spawned it, and this is just sort of a nice group select kind of thing. I'm moving troops here to basically make the sort of uncovered corridor in between these 2 blocks of woods completely untenable for the Confederates to move into at all. And they continue to keep pressing. And I should just encourage that. I should let them continue to pour hundreds or possibly thousands of their soldiers into what is increasingly becoming a kill zone. I've got artillery. I've got infantry lining it on both sides. I've got, I don't know if they're in present position now or not, but I think I have sniper skirmishers and well, they're sharpshooter units because they've got the unscoped, sharp. They've got the unscoped sharp. Whereas a brown unit would be called kind of a sniper versus they're both technically sharpshooters, aren't they? I mean, whatever. Yeah, they're the skirmishers with long range weapons. So we're taking a look at this. If you're playing the battle, I think understand the Confederate Army, especially as you expand out to the sunken church position. The Confederate Army will continue to come to you very aggressively, and you can use that to your advantage. In this particular instance, I sort of take the mission's bait, and I kind of come to them. I take the role play of like, the Confederate Army's here, we need to fight them, and I run with it, and I say, yes, we do need to fight them, and I come at them, and it costs me not that much. I come out of this battle kind of okay. Big casualties for the Union side is somewhere in the vicinity of, I want to say 7,000 and change. It's close to 8, but not quite 8. So I'm okay with that. Across 3 Corps, all in the vicinity of 20,000. I'm okay with 8 net across 3. It's like it is in a lot of my battles where it's not even. It's not like 100 across the line. It's, some units here and there are down to half strength, and then some units here and there barely had, 100 casualties. But it is what it is. So there's a particularly heavy Confederate thrust coming up from Dunker Church, and it is met, unfortunately, by 2 Corps. I mean, the guys who've been here since the opening part of the battle. So my most tired, least well rested and armed troops at this point are the ones bearing, at this juncture anyway, the lion's or the brunt of the fighting. That doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to me, obviously. But the more and more and more the Union artillery advantage starts getting deployed and caught up with the Army, the more and more and more this battle's over already. I have enough cannon in place now that the Confederates are going to have a hard time mustering an offensive because they're going to get shelled to shit and back, basically. And that a combination of some maneuvering and using cover and then aggressive cavalry charges and that kind of thing is all part of it. But really it comes down to overwhelming artillery support when combined with, skirmishers just harrying in the flanks, and line infantry utilized in cover, basically. So, I mean, yeah, kind of here we are. This is easily the messiest part of the battle right now that you're looking at. They have sort of successfully gotten an offensive thrust off in Dunkerchurch. Now, it's cost them pretty heavily, but it's cost me just as heavily. I've got units that are at half strength or less. I've lost an officer or two. They're exhausted. You know, but at the same time, hey, I've got a direct line of fire now on one of their artillery brigades, and I've got another unit of infantry reduced to less than half strength, now in melee, running away, routing from 1 and soon to be 3 cav units, and they're going to start falling apart. And then on the Union right screen left, over here near Dunker, I've got elements of I Corps, basically a whole division of I Corps, moving into support Second Corps, and they're going to help secure this territory around where the cav is now, and push into the sunken road position from a flank that the Confederate position can't support. And we'll get there in a second. But it on a grand level, it works out great. On a tactical level, the individual units of 2 Corps that are currently engaged around Dunkerchurch are getting chewed to pieces, and it's a shame. They bear, I would say, 70% of the total net casualties across the entire army are felt within 2 Corps, and that's just the fact that they're the vanguard. It's just the fact that they're here first, and they're charged with kicking these guys out of this position. So outside of the tactical discussion about what's happening on the screen, I have a blast. I had a blast playing this battle. Antietam is so fun because, you know, the Malvern and Gaines Mill campaigns, those are also chances for you to get your army and play a big battle by yourself with no AI troops or whatever to fuck up the scaling. At the same time, like to my mind anyway, like Malvern and Gaines Mill are baptism by fire for your whole army. They are difficult battles that are hard by the virtue of the fact that so much of your force is fresh. So much of your force is inexperienced and ill-trained and whatever. And Antietam is Second Bull Run as well, I think, to a lesser extent, Second Bull Run. But Antietam is a chance for you to bring 3 Corps to a battle where you have the whole battlefield to maneuver and their experience. And that's the difference between this and Second Bull Run. I think your 3 maneuver element combat command type situation units have been put together and are functional and have combat experience and whatever. And so you can choose to focus all of that experience into I Corps and probably by now start fielding a pretty meaningful number of 2-star units. Or you can go with the option that I've chosen, where my desire has been to keep the experience relatively even across the army, such that theoretically speaking, and this isn't really the case, but theoretically speaking, I could put any division of this army in pretty much any place on the battlefield and expect them to perform more or less the same. Everybody's got 1 star. Everyone has rifles. All of the unit perks are more or less uniform across the point. Now, there's different quality rifles. The Springfield 1861 versus the 1855. You know, all those kind of things. There are qualitative differences. And an I Corps 1-star unit that's been with us since the Battle of Philippi, and a 3 Corps 1-star unit that picked up its star barely at the tail end of Bull Run is, of course, not going to be the same thing. but I can rely on 3 Corps units to handle their part of the fight. And I know I can rely on I Corps to seal the deal and to really kind of show up at the parts of the battle I need them to show up. And I like that evenness. I like that evenness of quality, even if there are better units within that 1-star band, and we're starting to get to the point where some infantry brigades are closing on their 2nd star. There are better units within that band. I know that basically every unit here is a 1-star unit, and I can win the war with 1-star units. I have so much fun with this battle. I actually love this fight from the Confederate perspective too, even though usually here we have numeric parity of nearly 1-to-1. From the Confederate perspective, when you come to this part of the fight, you're almost always fighting an army twice your number. But they have to come to you, and the terrain can favor a defender if utilized very well. And the AI is doing a pretty good job of mounting what I would call an active defense. They are not giving me a chance to breathe. They are not giving me a chance to rest. To a degree, Union artillery is kind of making them pay for that. Absolutely. Overlapping fields of fire and many rifles are also, of course, making them pay for that. And I would imagine their officers are dying at the same rate mine are, and a number of these brigades are being led by random NCOs, and they're down at least 1 battery of artillery, and they're going to be down a brigade of infantry here pretty soon. They're absolutely worse for wear, but they are mounting an aggressive and effective active defense. And that's one of the things I think is really cool about this battle too, is this is not just some dug-in static foe that you just sort of figure out where they are and then outmaneuver them and that's it. They maneuver, they move around. And they get staggered reinforcements just like you do, and it's a classic grand battle in every definition of that term, and it's one of the things that makes this battle one of my favorites in the campaign. Is the armies, the Confederate army is kind of already ready to go because the AI just kind of gives it a hand up, and they're like, all right, here's your stars, and here's your guns, and here's your experienced leadership corps, because we need you to have that so that the player has a good time. All right, cool, whatever, sure, you have that stuff. But the Union army, by I would say second bull run, is ready to go, and Antietam is when you've had the chance to sort of firm up on some of the things and decisions you've been trying to make and the strategies you've been trying to follow and all that kind of stuff. Let's take a less macro perspective really quick. The Union army is for the most part where it's going to be. I'm in the come at me row phase of the battle plan. So I'm basically content to just sort of hidey hole in my trees here and make the Confederates come to me. Now, there are some engagements along the line here where essentially I've got guys standing in the open trading blows with the Confederates, and I hate that. I don't like that part of the fight at all. What I do like is that it's grinding these units down, and they are starting to shatter. They're losing batteries for sure, but they're also losing whole brigades. And even though we're trading blows in the open with some of these Confederate units, they're being hit from 2 or 3 units at once. And no unit in this game, to my knowledge, can sustain fire inbound. Yeah, 2 brigades just shattered right now. No unit in this game can sustain that kind of fire and keep it up. And they're getting shelled and they're getting musketed from a couple different directions, and they're in the open too, and their casualty counters are just ticking by like flies. I'm more in danger in the flanks than I am anywhere else, and really only on the far Union left flank, screen right. And that's just because I don't have artillery there. I have all of the guns essentially in the center Just look at the ground. It's so churned up. All of the guns in the center essentially telling the Confederates, like, you can't have this. This is not for you anymore. And the AI keeps on trying to see if they can't press their luck. So this is what I was talking about on the left here of the screen, the Union right. It's so confusing because I come from the north. This is the flanking attack from, I want to say it's I Corps' 2nd Division, but I'm not actually sure of which division it is. Anyway, it's troops from I Corps. They're deployed to the flank of Sunken Road. And we'll get to the troops down here in a second. They're deployed to the flank of Sunken Road in a way that Sunken Road is not set up to repulse. They are prepared to take an attack coming across the river. They are prepared to deal with an attack coming from the north. The way that their troops are disposed, they are not prepared, to quote Illidan, "You are not prepared." They are not prepared to handle an attack from the west, which comes in pretty heavy for me right now. I also send the Cavs streaming into Sharpsburg to take out 3 otherwise unsupported artillery batteries, and if I can get them, a general, but I'm not all that worried about the general at this point. It is the 3 batteries of cannon that are just sitting there otherwise undefended. Another brigade looks like it's shattered in the north. I send infantry to support just because they're in position. And this is when their position starts to crumble. I keep the brigade or the division attack in division line, and it's relatively a straight line. I have some skirmishers to support. I have some sharpshooters to support. I press in, and I realize, like, this is the opportunity. This is the moment, the Clausewitzian Schwerpunkt moment. I launch into the offensive with gusto from every direction, thinking to shatter as many units as in this attack as I can, and then obviously also take Sharpsburg. And, I mean, more or less that's how it goes. And it's all because I spent the entire first phase of this, the first 3-hour phase of the battle, just letting them come to me and degrading units and killing or wounding or whatever Confederate soldiers to the point where they could not put up meaningful resistance against the combined might of, we'll call it 2.5 Confederate or Union Corps. I mean, look at the numbers disparity. Then I'm in the units currently caught up in that little bubble in the middle there by Sunken Road, and then the Union kind of surrounding them from every possible direction. Like, there's no way. There's no way. There's no safe terrain for them. There's no cover. There's no unified front. They're under attack from enough different directions. They can't mount a unified defensive effort, except one that faces back into the river. I suppose they could do that. But the defensive efforts that they have push them to Sharpsburg, which I've just captured. I don't have the flag, but I've got 3 cavalry brigades terrassing around that town, and then I've got an infantry brigade in there as well, and I've got sniper skirmishers and stuff moving in. This is pretty cool. They attack my flank with 2 brigades, and I just give ground. I just fall back because it's open terrain. I have the opportunity to do so. I fall back and I support with sharpshooters who unfortunately, or no, they're skirmishers. I support with skirmishers, and then I push infantry up to support again. So the infantry reform, they close the line, they push up in the gap, and the Confederates are tired and repulsed, and the offensive resumes. All of that goes smashingly. All of these troops that were guarding Dunker get repositioned down towards the Sharpsburg mission, along with Fiasco. The artillery joins the artillery park in the center, and all of that, kind of continues. We've got one tiny itty-bitty brigade of cannon left that I route. Fall the cavalry back because they're sending their own cav into the city. This one last thin, desperate gray line of fence defending individuals get repulsed by just frankly combined fire from, I think, 4 brigades or maybe just 3, but just so many that they can't stand up to that kind of fire. And now you have this sort of conga line of Confederate units, and I start to aggressively advance with the intention of chasing them essentially into that river that sort of intersects into Sharpsburg, basically that river that goes into Sharpsburg. I want to just chase them into that river and blast the hell out of them. And then, yeah, I guess let's talk about the South really quick. So if you cross that bridge, it starts a timer, and the Confederates get one last wave of reinforcements, and if you cross that bridge, they don't. And I'd like this battle and I like all of these battles basically just to go as long as they can. Because honestly, I've only got so much time to play. You know, like I've got life. I've got a job. I've got school. I've got a girlfriend. I've got, the gym. I've got life. And then you don't care about that stuff. You're here for Civil War action. I get that. But I've got life. I only have so much time to play. So when I earmark a session for these battles, I usually play one or at most, if it's one major battle, or I'll play like 2 of the side missions, is usually what I can fit into a schedule. When I earmark a session for these battles, man, I want that thing to go as long. I want that thing to go as long as it can. I want to get all the boom I can in there. It predominantly just based a bang buck measure. So I don't want to cross the bridge, which the cavalry here is suicidally trying to cross into a division plus of Union troops just sort of waiting for them. Because I want the battle to go as long as it can, and I want as many Confederates to show up as long as they can. And that's what I was talking about with like why I even brought up my real life in the situation. I don't want to cross the bridge because I don't want to shorten it. It's not even about the Confederate casualties, although it's not about that. Let's get some kills. Let's steal some guns. Let's, level some units up. Let's do all that stuff. It's all about all of those things, but it's also, let's milk the game for an extra half hour of playtime. Because, I think we all remember when it used to be, when I first played Sid Meier's Gettysburg or any other, I played Command and Conquer or whatever. I could just play kind of whenever I wanted to for as long as I wanted to. It comes time to, what's the line? It comes time for boys to put down boyish things and do adult stuff. And I can't pretend that this is not a boyish thing. This is absolutely a boyish thing. But this is my respite from all the adult crap I do, all the other stuff. So when I can put together a couple hours to do this, you better believe I'm going to get every minute of game time that I can make happen. So anyway, back to the game. Union troops who had been up near Dunkard Church, it is elements of 2nd Corps, I find that only appropriate, are moving to take Sharpsburg. They have the honor. The 1st Corps Cav Division is wiping a unit that got separated from the rest of the body. Predominantly elements of I Corps now, and the artillery train are continuing to push the body of defenders who were in and around Sunken Road down towards Sharpsburg and the river. And you don't know the name of this river, possibly the Sharpsburg River or Antietam River. Possibly. And most of these... anyway, yeah. I've got troops from second Corps in the town. And so it's the same sort of reverse pincher or double pincher thing, double envelopment. I Corps pushes them south, and then 2 Corps catches them and smashes them, and they've got nowhere to go. That's basically the plan. I should have looked this up, but if I'm not mistaken, the Union tended to name these battles for rivers, and the Confederates tended to name these battles for the nearest city, I think. And I could have that backwards. But you'll notice, and if you're watching this, you probably already know, you get a lot of different names for these battles. So for the Union, this is the Battle of Antietam, and for the Confederates, I think this is called the Battle of Sharpsburg, or it was called that at the time. So if that town there is Sharpsburg, it stands to reason, at least at a passing glance in terms of logic, that we are also fighting over the Antietam River. Maybe. But I don't know. So yeah, the Confederate Army occupies basically this thin, narrow strip where they are simply awaiting their opportunity, their turn in line, to be churned to pieces by 3 units of long-range skirmishers, several dug-in and very weathered Second Corps brigades, and then whenever I have the artillery park in position, obviously also that. They can get shelled out, they can get crushed in the inexorable advance of the blue coat. Any or all of these eventualities would be acceptable as far as I'm concerned. The Confederate position south of this little sort of creek thing is being increasingly compromised by the 3 sharpshooter units who are, again, having a field day. And, there's that unit there guarding the bridge. I'm more than content to leave them there, frankly. I'm not worried about 1 or 2 brigades that kind of make it through with stragglers, but I do want that supply wagon. Yep, got it. Cool. Awesome. So this is the sort of annoying cleanup phase because you've won the battle, but you can't get sloppy or the battle will beat you, despite the fact that any sane commander on the field in real life would retreat, would say, oh, shit, we've lost this particular fight. It's now our job to preserve the army to fight another day, quite literally. And that's not what the computer does, because the computer has apparently a contract on Camino because they can clone a Confederate army whenever they want it. And they frequently do, because I will crush this, and apparently the Confederacy is able to conjure up, 75,000 veteran recruits out of nowhere, without, unduly hindering the central or the far western theaters or the fight, out in Texas or whatever. My understanding is there's plenty of fighting along the entirety of the border. It was just much, 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 much less dense. But like any casual scholar of this particular era, like, I find it fascinating, but I must admit that my level of knowledge only goes so deep. So like any casual scholar, my knowledge predominantly extends to all the stuff that everyone's already heard of, Sharpsburg, Manassas Junction, Gettysburg, Appomattox Courthouse, Chickamauga, that kind of stuff. And I didn't follow with the same level of interest the fighting up and down the Mississippi, or which of these battles that we play here is part of McClellan and then Meade, and like the trials and tribulations of the Army in Northern Virginia versus the Western Campaign, and then eventually the Sherman's March to the Sea. That's a fascinating, military movement, but I don't know which of these battles is really which one. Is it, because I know we do kind of crisscross back and forth from one campaign to the next. If we're the Army of Northern Virginia responsible for the Battle of Gettysburg and everything, I don't think that we should be aware overly much in terms of this of participating in the Battle of Vicksburg. My understanding is that was two separate combat commands that undertook those two campaigns, and yet because of the magic of video gaming, Fiasco's Space Marine Corps handled all of these fronts by themselves. My guys have armor and stuff. I don't know, I guess. So just more and more and more units are shattering. There's not a lot of really exciting commentary to be had about this particular phase of the battle. You control every flag at this moment. If your battlefield situation looks even remotely like mine, you control every flag you need to. You have such a dominant terrain advantage. To come to you, the Confederates have to go uphill over open ground or attack dug-in troops in urban terrain. And the best part is this urban terrain is flanked on the extreme Union right? Yes, right. Screen left, by heavily wooded terrain. So there's not even really a great way for the Confederate Army to wiggle its way around and attack me from some kind of flank. They've got no option but, realistically, to retreat. To cede the field and live to fight another day at Fredericksburg or wherever the next battle is. And, of course, the computer just doesn't do it. So there's not really a great deal of interesting commentary. They cross the river, they get shot to shit. That's it. The back portion of this battle is me getting fancy with skirmishers. I am obsessed now. Having seen the efficacy of these units, I'm trying to work towards second stars for as many of them as I can get. And theoretically, ideally a third star, but let's wait. I want to get all the batteries I can get. I want to get all the dudes I can get. I want to knock out officers if I can. I want supply wagons. I want it all. And I know that the most efficient way to do this, now that that reinforcement wave of theirs has shown up, would be to sally out from the city, meet them in the open with infantry because they're depleted and they're all that kind of stuff, and just crush them. But I get playful, and I'm seeing I'm seeing how good I can do with skirmishers, basically. So this is not a tactically optimal utilization of my resources, but I had fun. So yes, it is. On the other side of the river, I'm just getting whatever pot shots I can on the Confederate defenders. I end up shattering that unit just because we're here so long. I've got cannon who are unfortunately out of ammo, and I've got infantry who are not out of ammo blasting at them. And, I do, for a volley, I do 3 casualties, but it adds up. So it's fine. And it turns out that when you shoot these line units with 3 units, and you focus fire, they all get morale shocked pretty quick, which is not really at all a surprise. It's just kind of fun. I get my cav in there with the idea that I'm going to try and swoop up the rear. And so it turns out there are some defenders, Confederate defenders, further south along the river. There's a crossing. I'm not looking at it right now. I'm not even aware of it. It's just further south of here. Follow the track of the river, and there's a crossing, a ford there. There's defenders there, wherever that is. And I move the cavalry up, and the defenders end up getting a shot on them. Yeah, this is what happens. I move the cav up into what I think is a safe place in my rear. It is not a safe place in my rear. They get flanked there, and I'm like, flanked by what? What the fuck is shooting at me? I think it's cannons maybe or something. It's infantry guarding a river ford, and they see cavalry coming up on them. Yeah, back right here, these guys. So just be aware of that, because I wasn't, and it cost me, whatever it cost me from those cav guys. And then I'm looking for the opportunity to get the cav in there, because I'd love to close this thing out with a triumphant, Wellesian kind of heavy cav charge, and it's just not a thing. It's just not going to be the way this particular battle breaks down. The concentration of their forces is too great. Yes, their army's defeated. Yes, they've lost the field. Yes, all of that stuff is true. But I would charge with my cav, and in doing so, I would basically sacrifice them, because there are still enough units on the field to take these glass cannons that are cav units and shatter them. So artillery park, infantry on the hill, blast. I don't really know why they're not, say, forming up and charging towards the flag in Sharpsburg, because if the Confederates held the city, I would lose the battle. Well, it'd probably be a draw, but I would not get a victory, and that's just as important. With the troops you've got left, it's probably impossible to hold Sharpsburg, but since the AI doesn't seem to think retreating is actually an option, they got to do what they got to do. Go for the best option to force on me a draw versus a victory. Because at this point, I've won. At this point, the battle's already over. I'm just playing. I'm honestly milking skirmisher experience. Which is really fun, actually. Skirmishers are super duper fun. And I feel like my commentary in this particular battle has been kind of rambly. Takeaways for the fight. Open terrain like this is not actually... This is rough terrain for cav. And because I feel like I have the Confederate Army dead to rights, I'm like, okay, that this is... If I'm going to get a cav charge, it's pretty much now or never. Sometimes you can benefit from ignoring the objective for a while and just wearing your opponent down. Also a takeaway, especially when we get into this this is the mid campaign. This is probably the early part of the mid campaign. And I think that the important takeaway here is the Union quantitative advantage of quality gear. Does that make sense? So it's still a qualitative advantage, but it ends up being one in equipment, not training. Although it can also be training, obviously. If you do well, you can maintain the experience, the body of XP across some of these units, that they get to be as good as or better than their Confederate counterparts. Degrade the enemy army, to the point that they can't resist your maneuvers, and you will save yourself casualties. That's my takeaway from the Antietam campaign, and that was actually a takeaway I had from all of the battles in the Antietam campaign, we'll call it, was that sufficient prep of where you are in the battlefield isn't enough. You need to prep the enemy army. You need to prep your army. You need to make sure they're rested. You need to make sure they rear up on ammo. You need to make sure the enemy is, tired and shelled and morale shocked. And if you can, their officers are dead. And if you can do all of those things, even half of them, your victory on the field will be cheaper in terms of the most important resource, your dudes. Because you can buy new guns, and you can buy new soldiers, absolutely. But in this game, that is expensive to do, especially if you want to retain any level of the quality that you had amassed in the past. In real life, it's impossible to just buy new dudes of the same caliber until we invent cloning or whatever. But that's, science fiction. The cleanup phase here for the battle is I use artillery to blast. This brigade gets shot off of this flag like 3 times, and then they try and charge the skirmishers, and then they run in the woods, and then they come back and they try and man the bridge, and they get blasted again, and then it just sort of happens again and again and again, and then that's pretty much this part of the battle is we're done at this point. I've preserved the cav in I-Corps. The 2-Corps cav basically needs to be rebuilt, which is wonderful. The skirmishers are all doing excellent. Artillery just got shitloads of kills. Infantry in some places did fine, and in other places not so much. And we are about to wrap it up. So I'll be returning to the in-game recording in just a second. And I think that's probably as good as we're going to do. I don't feel like digging out the unit that's guarding that bridge, which is, probably 1,200 guys, give or take. And there's the 400 or so left over in that small unit plus the supply wagon. So we've captured all of the objectives. We've protected most of our army. We've taken some pretty heavy losses. There's been some tough fighting, but I think we've absolutely given worse than we've gotten. And let's take a look how we did. So yeah, 80 with the cavalry losses, 9,400 give or take. 9,500 total. Oh my goodness, yeah, wow. Near total Confederate destruction, actually damn near total Confederate destruction. 8,400 infantry, 1,000 cavalry. That's not that bad. Heavier in the cav than I would like. That's going to be expensive to replace, but managed to do, all of the objectives. Some of the howitzer units got some truly astounding kill counts as well for the light infantry. First Lightfoot with Sharps did some truly astounding work. Yeah, I'm actually pretty okay with a lot of this. Some of the infantry units, particularly looks like 16th, kind of Union only. So yeah, several of the units that were in 2-Corps, basically, which were involved in that heavy fighting up near Dunker Church, probably the worst of it. Promotions all over the place. That's fantastic. Nothing crazy. No new like captains all the way up to general or captains to colonel or anything. But we got some light colonels with a bunch of new generals. That's excellent. We lost a general deceased and a lieutenant colonel deceased. Promoted up to a new major general and have a whole bunch of other generals. Take a look at captures. Okay, great, excellent. A lot of Harper's Ferries captured, a lot of Napoleons captured, a lot of 12-pound howitzers. Yep, that makes sense. That's it in terms of any weapons that were captured in number. Looks like it's a Harper's Ferry that the Confederates are using in large number, as well as a smattering of what I'll qualify as like medium tier artillery. So 12-pound Napoleons, 3-inch ordnances. So those are cannons that are not quite as quote unquote good as the 24-pound howitzer or the 20-pound Parrott or that class of gun, but they're not as old or ineffective as the 6-pound field or the 12-pound howitzer, though they are clearly still using the 12-pound howitzer. Okay. Hey, that's Antietam. Thanks for sticking this out. I know this is a long one, and I will see you guys as we march to... Actually, I honestly don't remember which one the next one is, but the next major battle, whatever is coming after Antietam. Probably Chattanooga, Fredericksburg, maybe Fredericksburg. I don't know. I had a good time. This is Fiasco. I hope you did too, and I will see you later. Fiasco out.